All right. Hello, everyone. Uh, we are here today with Bernard Wiseman from Doctors Without Borders, or MSF. And he's here to tell us all about MSF. And I guess we're gonna jump straight into it with the first question. Could you briefly describe could you briefly describe the work that MSF carries out throughout the world?
Sure. Yeah. So MSF, for Doctors Without Borders, is a medical humanitarian organization currently working in 70 countries across the world. And primarily, MSF currently works in kind of international medical care. So, with emergencies, outbreaks, conflict, MSF is one of the first organizations on the ground to respond to emergencies. The organization started in 1971, kind of with a group of doctors and journalists, with a kind of strong commitment to international medical care, and also a strong desire to speak out about what they saw across the world to make sure that the rest of the world knew what they were seeing and what was going on in the countries where we worked. So currently, yeah, we have a very large organization, about 60,000 employees worldwide. And I've been working with MSF since 2015, and yeah, I've never looked back. It's been a really great time.
Nice. So, in that case, since you've been working since 2015, could you talk to us about what it is that you do over there?
Sure. So for me, in general, we kind of break up kind of some of the human resources with MSF as kind of medical and non-medical. So obviously, in any kind of emergency, you're going to need your doctors, your nurses, and your medical professionals to provide the support to patients. From my side, I am kind of the non-medical side. So anything that is, logistics or security or operations is kind of falls into the things that I do. So if you think about a hospital, obviously you have patients and you have doctors and nurses, but where does the medicine come from? How do you keep the lights on? How do you make sure the temperature is cool in the operational theater? So all of kind of the non-medical logistical aspects of a medical intervention is kind of the stuff that I started doing. So I started working with MSF in 2015 on a measles vaccination campaign in the Democratic Republic of Congo. There was a very large outbreak at that time, and our teams were trying to move across the southern region of DRC to try to provide vaccinations for children to try to get ahead of this outbreak. Measles, we don't know that much about it, or we don't see that much in the news here in the US. But when you combine measles with malnutrition and other issues with children, it can have a very high mortality rate. So we were seeing a lot of children in our hospitals. And so my job as a logistician was to get the vaccines that have to be maintained at a temperature of 2 degrees and 8 degrees from Paris to the Democratic Republic of Congo, and then across all of the villages and communities where we saw the outbreak. So a lot of hard work just getting the medicine and the vaccines into the medical professionals. So that starts with planes. It comes in boxes. And then, to some of the smaller villages and communities, we have to get motorcycles and, giant coolers that you would have in order to make sure that we maintain those temperatures. So that's kind of what I did kind of early on. And since that time, I've been working across the world with MSF. And I've recently become, head of mission, which is a different job, but very still non-medical, but more kind of overall operational strategy and kind of working with governments and ministries.
It's interesting, to think about like the kind of the various roles on which MSF works with, and just thinking about what you mentioned regarding your specific role. I'm wondering about, for instance, the kind of challenges that you face, because, for instance, you mentioned like in your first case with measles vaccines, the kind of transporting the vaccines. That's an example of a challenge that you must have dealt with. Are there any other particular challenges that you tend to face through your work over the years, through your role?
Yeah, in a lot of the conflict settings where we work, we usually have a lot of displaced populations, people fleeing violence, fleeing a war, and very often those people settle in camps, sometimes referred to as refugee camps or IDP camps. The problem with this, especially for logistics, especially to make sure that we can take care of our patients in the communities that are affected by these conflicts, we have to set up pretty much a whole town in order to make sure that these people are taken care of and provided with proper sanitation. So in a lot of contexts where I've worked with a lot of fighting or displacement, we've had to provide clean drinking water for a population that's fleeing violence. We have to create and build latrines in order to separate kind of clean drinking water and wastewater. We have to build hospitals in order to take care of people. So in some of the countries I've worked in, Central African Republic, South Sudan, we've had 50,000, 100,000 person refugee camps or displaced camps, and trying to provide clean drinking water and trying to provide sanitation just to bring up the health levels, but also provide some dignity to the populations is very, very challenging, especially in some environments where it's very, very difficult to get materials and supplies. So, generally a logistician or water and sanitation engineers, their number one priority is we need to get safe drinking water to these people as soon as possible. And so, it can be very, very challenging.
To maybe look at it more again from a more global scope. So, what kind of projects are the most demanding for MSF? And I don't know if this was something that you've personally experienced, but maybe others, because you work in a lot of situations where very dangerous situations, partly, and where it might have been that that you actually feared, or someone feared, that they might not be coming back from this mission anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think we work in a lot of contexts that can be that do come with risk. But obviously, we take a lot of time and a lot of effort to make sure we're not taking undue risks. To send our teams and also not expose our patients to danger. But working in some of the contexts that I've described with heavy fighting and displaced populations can be very, very difficult to make sure that your teams and patients are safe. I came back from the Ukraine over the summer. And a lot of the work that we were doing was very basic, primary care, mobile clinics to displaced populations. But in the city where I was in Kharkiv, because there was active fighting, because there was artillery and missile strikes every day and night, a lot of the population was underground, and a lot of those displaced people were just living in subway stations, on the platforms, in tents, or sometimes on mattresses just on the subway platform. And so our teams were able to find where the people that needed help, and we were able to be sheltered within the subway station and also be able to provide care. But it really depends on the context and the conflict. It can be a very small mobile clinic that's very primary healthcare in that circumstance, or in some of the countries that really lack a lot of kind of infrastructure, we set up very large hospitals. Some 200, 300 bed hospitals in locations that have no access to healthcare. So it can really change. With the conflict and risk, we're always looking at that and trying to make sure that we're taking care of everyone and doing our due diligence. But it can vary across the country, as you know.
I think it's fascinating to think about, like when you speak about the various circumstances that you face, like the kind of adaptability, if that's a word that makes sense, that's required, because every project, every location that you're going to be at is going to have its different demands. And so, yeah, you mentioned you were involved in Ukraine, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So, for that specifically, how would you describe? Is there any other specific things you think would be interesting to talk about regarding that particular project?
Yeah, Ukraine, the war in Ukraine was quite an intense and still is an intense kind of activities that we're responding to that can change very, very quickly. So in Ukraine, luckily, a lot of the health infrastructure was able to maintain some of the services to the population and to patients. So some of the higher level care still was still functioning at a decent level during even kind of the large invasion. I was in Kharkiv, which was almost surrounded by Russian troops at some point over the summer, and even during a lot of the artillery and missile strikes, a lot of those hospitals were still running. Some were targeted and hit by some of the weaponry, but for us with MSF, what we saw and talking with the ministries of health and talking with the governors and what was really kind of lacking and where the gaps that were needed was trying to do mobile clinics to a lot of these displaced population kind of collective centers. A lot of people fleeing from the east to the west had kind of overloaded some of the health infrastructure. And so what MSF was doing was partnering with the Ukrainian government to try to help with some of these displaced population settings. Like I said before, we were in the subways overnight to try to provide kind of just primary care. Because when you're running from these conflicts, when you're running from war, you don't really get to grab all the stuff in your apartment or your house, to bring with you. These people are fleeing and going down into the subways with jackets sometimes. And they didn't have their diabetes medication, they didn't have their hypertension or a lot of these basic things that normally they would have. They just it was lost within the fighting. And so what we could do with MSF, with Doctors Without Borders, was go into these locations, do our consultations, work with patients who were without care and provide it on site. Another thing that we saw a lot of in Ukraine was the real lack or the need for mental health care. If you are Ukrainian, you're living in kind of these in these towns and villages and cities. It's very, very intense. You don't know if it's going to end. You've probably potentially lost relatives. There are probably relatives of yours and family members on the other side of the war. So how do you deal with this, especially if you're children? So our teams, we had a large number of teams of psychologists and social workers working in the subways, working in these dormitories with the populations to work with the children and the people suffering from some of the trauma. And I think that's kind of where we really, added a lot of value in that context, not just the care that we were providing, but also the mental health care, which really needed to, I would visit and talk with a lot of community leaders and mayors kind of throughout the Kharkiv Oblast along the front line. And we were talking about what we can provide, and they were really grateful and happy. And as soon as I said, we have psychologists, we can help with mental health care, these mayors, their eyes lit up. They knew exactly, this was what was needed. Like, this is exactly the gap that they couldn't provide to their communities, and they knew that their communities were suffering. And a few mayors, pulled me aside after our meeting and said, "Hey, I'm number one in line," because they themselves were under such stress, from this war, from the violence, that trying to hold a whole community together was just too much. And so that recognition was really, really helpful, and we were able to come in and work with the populations that were suffering from the fighting. And I think, that was one of the key results that we found early on in the war. And we still have teams, to this day, really close to the front lines providing that care, and even expanded into some work with physiotherapy with some of the war wounded that we've been seeing. But yeah, across the country in different contexts, it really depends. We were even able to convert an old Ukrainian train into a hospital. A lot of the kind of hospitals on the front lines were really overwhelmed with the war wounded, and beds were filling up, and there was no real adequate care. And so MSF partnered with the Ministry of Transportation, the Ministry of Health, and kind of rehabbed a train into a hospital to drive to the front lines, pick up patients, and then transfer them back, safely to hospitals safer from the front lines that could kind of absorb some of those patients. And that to me was really, really amazing. And that actually came from a logistician, some guy who had an idea of, well, how do we get these people to safety? And he was able, with his team, with the whole community, to turn a Ukrainian train car into an ICU, which is just kind of incredible.
It's an important question to resolve.
So wherever we go, we're able to adapt, and I think that's the best thing about working with MSF is, we have kind of our private funding, and so we can really adapt very quickly to the changings and the needs. And we kind of wrote the book on logistics, and so we have kits that can deploy very quickly. And if someone has a really good idea that they can kind of implement very quickly, we can direct them, and they can go. We're not sitting around, writing grants or worried about this or that. It's just we respond and we go. And I think that's kind of why I've been working with MSF for the last 7 years. It's been really really amazing to watch.
So looking at all of this, I know it probably depends a lot on how the war is going, but how do you think that things will evolve in terms of your operation in Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll see. The one thing that I really like about MSF is, we stay in locations even after the cameras are gone. I think, and we work in a lot of locations that people don't know about. So I think for as long as there are needs on the ground in Ukraine, I think our teams will be there. I think we've developed really good networks. We've developed really good relationships. I don't know, what the future holds with that conflict, but I think we'll be there for the long term. And I think we'll be there with the communities that are suffering from the violence, in whatever capacity that we think we can add value.
It's really great to hear that there's this continuous support as well as for this kind of operations, and you can take a quick minute to think about it, because you mentioned, for example, the fact that regarding that continuous support, it's continuous even when all cameras are off and there's not that particular attention onto it. It's just there no matter what, even with stuff that the public might not necessarily be aware about. And so I was wondering, it can be about any specific aspect of those kinds of projects, but I was wondering if there are any particular sides, like, of being involved with those sorts of projects, whether it be related to what you yourself do or any other aspects that you think are important, but that the public isn't necessarily too much aware about. That's why I say, if you all take a quick minute, just think about it, or unless you already know.
Yeah, I mean, I think, a big misconception about Doctors Without Borders sometimes is they think it's a lot of international, doctors and nurses coming into locations, but really, most of our staff, 90% of our staff are local to the country where we work, and extremely dedicated to helping and supporting their own communities. It's not outsiders coming in, but it's really just kind of working with people from the country to help them and their communities. And I think the dedication from those staff within those countries is just incredible. We've been working in some locations for decades just because of conflict or problems within those countries, and we have very, very great teams who are who never leave and continue to stay and work with the communities that are suffering. We're really very, very proud of all of our teams across the world. I think we respond to so many different things, and each project is very different. It's it's hard to kind of paint everyone's experience with the same brush. Just going through some of the activities that I've been a part of, I looking back, it's just kind of amazing, kind of the differences. Obviously that first the first measles vaccination campaign that I worked on was really helpful to me, because I came back home and I quit my job and I began working for MSF full time. But if you think about not just providing healthcare, but like the other things involved, in my second mission was also in the Congo, and I was working to build a hospital. I don't know if the public really understands the other things that we do, but in some locations the current infrastructure is just too small for the need. And so at the same time as our doctors and nurses are working with our patients to try to help them, me and my teams are building a new structure to make sure that they have adequate spacing and really good guidelines and really good facilities for the future, to help develop and work with those communities. And I think maybe that non-medical side is something that some people don't really know about. Our operational centers we have across the world, and we have kits available for whatever kind of conflict or activity or outbreak that we may need. If all of a sudden we have a cholera epidemic in Haiti, like we do now, we have a cholera kit. We know in like 5 or 6 different supply centers across the world, and we can just send out these kits to that country within a day in order to help respond to these crises, and we have boots on the ground very quickly in order to make sure that the outbreak doesn't spread too much or too many children are affected. And so I think maybe if I would answer your question again, it's the non-medical side that I think maybe we don't hear too much about, but it's really impressive, and the number of people who are kind of built into that and have been working and building hospitals and building latrines and bringing kind of clean drinking water to displaced populations. It's a really big operation, and it's a really amazing to see in real time and on the ground.
I get the feel that it's the go ahead, Floha.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to make a quick comment saying that like it feels like everyone who is involved would have their own stories about how they've been involved with MSF, because as you said, each project is one different due to various circumstances, that everyone who is involved with them will have a different story share. And so, as you said yourself, the picture that's being painted, it's kind of hard to do something, I get that feels uniform, because it's not like everyone has the same experience with it. And I think that's a fascinating aspect. I'll let you say what you wanted to say, Floha, but I just wanted to express that.
Now, I have another question, and now working in a lot of areas of crisis and all, but I wanted to ask if maybe you have like a personal anecdote to share, something that's really positive about your work.
I mean, there is a culture to MSF and the work, and I learned it on my second day working with Doctors Without Borders. As I said, I was working on that measles vaccination campaign in the Congo, and maybe 3 days of flights and travel to a very remote village in Katanga in the DRC. By the time I got there, we were still, driving around to different villages within the area to work with mobile clinics, to pick up patients, to give out drugs and vaccines. And on the second day, we were driving from one clinic to another clinic, and over the night there was a big storm, and a huge tree had fallen across the road. And we're driving up through these roads, and when I mean roads, these like bicycle paths in the middle of the jungle, in these Land Cruisers, because that's the only thing that can get through a lot of this terrain. And the driver pulls up, and all of a sudden we stop because the tree's in the middle of the road. And this is my first time working with the organization. In my brain, I was like, "Oh, I guess we can't get through. I guess we're gonna have to turn around." I didn't say anything. This is just like the narrative in my head. And all of a sudden, the driver gets out. He goes to the back of the truck, and I see him coming over my left corner, and he has an axe, and he's just starts chopping away at this tree, and I'm like, there's no way, there's no way that we're gonna cut this tree apart. But then I was like, whatever, we're gonna try it. And so I jump into the back, I grab an axe, and then someone else jumps in the back and they grab a saw. And literally for an hour in the middle of the day in the jungle of DRC, it's me and a couple of guys from the MSF team just chopping away at this tree. At one point we moved one of the large branches, and it turns out we were standing on a bunch of fire ants. And we had to run away for about 15 minutes. But then we come back and we're chopping at it again. And then we were able to like get it broken up enough that we were able to throw like a line over it and pull half of the tree away from the road with our Land Cruiser. And we are just sweating and gross and dirty, but we just jump back in the car and we drive on. And it wasn't just us, right? The doctors and the nurses also came out of the back, and where they were breaking trees and branches and trying to clear brush. And we just kept going to the next clinic, you know, and that was like 2 of 6 clinics for the day. And for me, you know, like, this is it. Like, this is what we do. We have to get to that next place. Like, we don't stop. There's, you know, there's barriers in the way. We're going to get through them. And this is like the second day of my work with MSF. And, yeah, you know, 10 to 15 fire ant bites and, you know, maybe some bloody knuckles with the tree. But yeah, it was great. And I think to me, that really represented to me, like, all right, this is, you know, this is what we do, and this is our organization, and we're going to make sure we get to our patients.
I'm just trying to. I really like it. It's teamwork. A lot of that, the teamwork in that situation. I love it. Oh boy.
The other thing about fire ants is you're pulling them out of your socks for the next like hour. So they're all in your clothes. No. It's really. Yeah. It was bad. No. Yeah.
Oh, the wash up must be funny afterwards. Wow. Yeah. Do you have something else you wanted to add, Flo?
No. You do you still have anything? Think we should slowly come to an end?
Yeah, because we've been there for half an hour. I don't want to take too much of your time. So we'll get to just onto like the kind of closing stuff. So as a general thing, if that would make sense, obviously the biggest support that people can provide is via, for example, donations, which is, for example, obviously what we're trying to drive with our event. But are there any other ways you can think of that people can also provide support, do you think?
Yeah, it's a really good question. You know, obviously, you know, just to go back to the donations aspect, you know, MSF is a private organization. You know, we don't take money from governments or you know, we don't have grants from this government or that government. All of our money comes from private donations, and it's those private donations that allow us to respond so quickly. You know, it's you know, we're not waiting around to write a grant or request funding, and you know, we're not going where a government or other organizations telling us to go. We go where we see the needs. You know, and so those private donations are really, really important to how we can respond and act, especially in emergencies. But I think also, you know, the other half of MSF is to hear from what's going on and to spread kind of the information of what we're seeing. So I would think, you know, for us, it's really important to be informed, go to the Doctors Without Borders website, see kind of what's going on, hear from our patients, hear from our staff, be informed about kind of the issues of the day and hear what people are doing across the world. I think that's really, really important. And it's very important for us as an independent organization. You know, we're neutral, we're nonpartisan. We share the stories from what we see. And it's really important for anybody to listen and hear what's going on across the world. And, you know, our teams are very, very close to these issues and to the conflicts and to the outbreaks. And I think, I would really recommend that people kind of hear what's going on across the world.
Staying informed. Yep. That seems like a fair point. Staying informed about what that's really happening. I suppose that's a good way to then just spread the word around, and then from there see what can be done. And especially just before we get onto the final thing, I also find it an interesting point as well that I think is important to emphasize the fact that the donations that MSF receives are private and not government funded or anything like that. So I think that's definitely an important point to emphasize as well, showing once again how important it is to have that support. I would imagine. So yeah, like my last question I would have for you is, do you have any like final thoughts of in like that that you'd like to share? Just before that, Flo, just double check. Do you have any other question that you have in mind?
Nope. I'm done.
All right, cool. So yeah, as I said, do you have any particular final thoughts, whichever they may be about, that you'd like to share to people?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you all again for having me on and spending some time and asking the questions. I think this has been really, really nice to talk about MSF and talk about my work, and giving me an opportunity to go down memory lane and reminisce about some of my experiences. And hopefully I've given enough, some good conversation to people, and some good information to listeners about MSF and international organization and some of the work we do across the world. And I really appreciate you having me on to talk, and thanks very much.